Hey everybody, how are you? Francis here. Yes, got one for you. This is all about control structure fraud. Yes, indeed. How to perpetuate a nationwide control structure fraud. I'm going to be giving you an example, but I'm going to be referring to many places. This clip has been long overdue. And while the initial topic is going to be around a utility company, a government-owned utility company in South Africa known as Eskom, it is something for everybody in this. Trust me, you'll enjoy it in terms of understanding the ways of the world. We'll be passing by some other more globalized points of interest that will make this whole narrative come home. Right now, if you talk to a South African friend who's way back home, he's just facing an extended session of load shedding and blackout. That's right. And now the problem with the load shedding and blackouts in South Africa is, apart from having no power, many of the dams, and South Africa gets its share of rain, but it's also pretty dry and it's summer down there. And quite a high number of the dams actually require pumped water. So when you have no electricity, suddenly, after a while, your pumped water dams start getting exceedingly low, as they are now. People start to have water shortages as well. Basically, when you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we're all looking for self-actualization and the feeling of Zen up top here. But part of the basics right down there is roof, shelter, and right amongst that, running water and power. Everything runs off power. The Wi-Fi stops working. My friend is running a business and he's got the generators out. The internet doesn't work consistently with it. It keeps popping in and out. It's an absolute nightmare. So they've got diesel generators burning fuel to generate power. That's like going backwards in efficiency. So let's have a look at this incredible narrative of Eskom, which is one that is long overdue for me to cover. And it's been a long suffering point for South Africa. So a couple of numbers. Eskom officials say they're in a race against time to avoid a complete grid collapse. They're preparing for stage 5 and 6 load shedding, which means 5,000 megawatts and 6,000 megawatts for that country in particular. They're needed because 17 million of Eskom's 47 installed capacity is not available. Why? Servicing unplanned breakdowns. Now, why do you think unplanned breakdowns happen? It's called maintenance. It's called understanding, maintenance, and looking after the state assets you have inherited. They've also had a minor bit of bad luck, but this is just a cherry on the top of a whole bunch of dominoes toppling over. And there was a cyclone in Mozambique that took down 900 megawatts of the Cabora Bassa, which is kind of Mozambique, heading Mozambique way, and is hydroelectric. And there's no clear sign for when that's going to come back. So that's just added to an already big squeeze. But you need to understand, blackouts occur when demand exceeds supply, as this article is going on to explain. It's pretty simple. But what happens is you can't actually operate a system when demand exceeds supply. What actually happens, and I'm including this because this is really awesome diagrammatic explanation. The minute you have a supply of 45,000, then you've got a demand of 46,000. In between, the equipment starts to become overloaded. So generators, transformers, cable, and switchgear, they get overloaded. What tends to happen is that because of their safety mechanisms, to avoid overload and breakage, they have basically circuit breakers. In other words, they trip out, so they cut out. So all those that are excessively sensitive to overload immediately terminate their supply and they switch themselves off. So what actually happens for 1,000 megawatt overload, you suddenly have a third of your supply now switch off. So what actually happens is your supply drops, of course. A third of it goes away. So what then happens is the remaining two-thirds is now trying to still serve the same over requirement and excess demanding, which cause even more overload till eventually those more robust systems have to trip out and then you get total blackout. It's kind of like in the movie if you're in the aerial plane and you just see lights and areas doop, 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 bloop, bloop, and boom, it's black. That's kind of what happens. And then you get the black start, which is when you need to restart all this kit. Once you get everybody switched off and you only start adding them back piece by piece. This is a nightmare. This is kind of like when you've pulled the plug out of your computer midway through doing something. It has to do a reboot, go up and save things, reload, files didn't close. So it takes much, much longer, 2 to 3 weeks. And you start with a little diesel engine that starts another bigger diesel engine that is powerful enough now to start a small segment of the power station that will generate enough power, because the power station itself consumes power to run itself. Then it now has enough power through these 2 diesel ever bigger engines to create enough power to restart itself, to get the whole power station running, and then it can then start running, and that supply can then be added, and then it can supply a demand that is less, not even equal to, but safely less than what it is. So slowly you reopen the grid black. So black starts are something that are empirically to be avoided. Here you can see the example: a battery starts an industrial diesel engine that then starts a small key transmission lines that then gets enough power in it to start up the whole station, and then that station can start producing. So preventing a total blackout is an absolute nightmare, and that's why people do load shedding when they recognize that the load demand is reaching close to that of the supply. Then you get certain things being knocked out on an inclement weather condition, and you start to run into real trouble. Now they've already said it's going to go into April, and now they're saying it's actually going to be worse than everybody thinks. So if we transition to this, warning, Eskom's problems are even bigger than what you think. And we'll go back, actually, by the way, and I've got a lot of data and information for you to how it all starts. So, but first, a little bit of understanding of the whole power game, and it's kind of interesting. So first of all, South Africa is also out of diesel. So you run generators, all generators is running on diesel. So what you're finding is the alternative to backup is not there. Diesel power, fuel powered stations can't run. Most of them, a large amount of them are largely coal in SA. The dams are low, as I've already mentioned, and then they've had the small contributory Kabora Bassa. On that point, that prior to 94, and in fact from the 70s, 80s, going into the 90s, South Africa was an exporter to the larger Southern African area of electricity. Now they're in a situation they can't provide their own businesses, including at a previous event telling mines they need to shut down. You're talking about the fulcrum industry. One of the fulcrum industries of a country has to be switched off for part of the day. How do you run a mine on part power? It's unbelievable. Anyway, there's 3 generator units that are running with boiler tube leaks, which place them at risk. So that which is on supply, they're already in a leaky condition that could be taken out anytime. Again, lack of maintenance, lack of planning, lack of care for the system that they inherited. So there's lots of unplanned outages that can occur as well. Most of the short-term solutions are unlock the regulatory constraints to allow those that have the means to become independent. Rooftop solar installations at home, let everyone do it wherever they need, etc., etc., etc. Commence the procurement and installation of strategically positioned battery energy storage, so that you can actually build sort of stockpile of energy, etc., and allow little microgrids where people have renewable energy. Let the people with the means start investing in the renewable energy. Maybe have some schemes that support it, but guess what? They don't really want to do that. This is all about a supply pinch, and I think there's intent in this. It's quite clear that if you unlock all this regulated legatory constraints, what actually happens is the individual becomes self-reliant, and that is a big thing monopolies freaking hate. Eskom is the sole provider of electricity in all of South Africa, and you will see how much they've put up prices recently, and I will draw control structure, how it fits into all of this shortly. The key thing is, if you allow and you dereg and you allow people to go and form their own free creation and storage of power and make it easier for the procurement and the construction thereof, and you allow much more of the regulatory constraints to be dropped so that you can start getting people totally out there on their own. And it's amazing that they have constraints while they are load shedding of any variety, particularly for businesses, but even for people, and especially factories and mines that would love to just have can't trust Eskom, can be self-reliant. They would love that. But for some or other reason, that's not exactly been happening, and I don't think it's all down to incompetence. And don't get me wrong, there's a ton of incompetence right here in what the people of SA currently have. So let's talk about the prices. I mentioned that prior to 94, when Mandela was released, we actually had a situation where we were an exporter of electricity. And I'm going to show you a diagram shortly. In fact, in 1992, the then National Party government actually was interested in privatizing the Eskom. And of course, they would have been interested. They had actually almost over-invested and had become a net exporter and future-proofed Eskom for a number of years going into the future. In other words, we had the surplus of supply, we had real good down, lots of contracts were awarded. I'm sure some of the National Party friends might have benefited out of those contracts. It's not only the ANC that has some ability to earn out of government contracts, but at least they did the work, they provided it, and they oversupplied, and they future-proofed Eskom for a number of years. However, you will see the point when that surplus started to run out. This is your inflation curve in the blue, and this is your Eskom tariff. It's a utility. Utility shouldn't need to go up at the same rate of inflation, but it could have been allowed to go up at that rate. But there was a surplus of supply. Then what then happened? Around about 2007, all the maintenance issues that hadn't been done since 94, we handed over this amazing system and good provider. I used to swim in the Eskom swimming pool. They had incredible facilities and sports. You're talking about a juggernaut. It's kind of like British Gas would have been during before the privatization era all came about. Anyway, the National Party didn't get its way. It didn't get privatized. In the end, this asset, and I think part of them may have been greed on their behalf to strip some of the family jewels, but there may have been good intent too. They may have been concerned about the future custodians of what they had built, and that concern has totally been justified if it existed. Because essentially, it was left to run, and slowly they started transformation, taking out skilled engineers. It's more about colors and faces. This is so easy. You just show up. The thing is just spurting out the electricity. No one needs to do anything until suddenly those maintenance issues started biting, and still suddenly the supply and business, etc., the requirements kept growing naturally, and suddenly you end up with a shortage. And you can see the reflex point from 2007. From 2007, electricity has gone up 356% to 17. So it's not even the last 2 years, by the way. So it's higher if you take the last 2 years. I will tell you what they're doing now. So what you actually got a 4.5 times of your electricity price in 10 years. Think about that. Think about that when you've only gone up 70% in the entire decade in inflationary terms. It's an absolute disaster. Now, South Africa was an absolute leader in electricity. They were one of the lowest cost producers prior. So these charts actually show a little bit about how, and I'm going to go straight to this one, how when you measure relative affordability of electricity as a percentage of medium income. Now, South Africa didn't have the highest medium income. There was a large unbanked population, but they were about 15.2% compared to, say, the US, France, Sweden, UK, roughly between 3 and 7%. So it was only about double in the 2007 as priced in 2017 money. Today, if you take the 2018 as priced in 2017 money, it's 44.8% as a percentage of median income. The relative affordability, 44.8, and it's heading to Rwanda levels with more coming its way. Now you might ask, how can this be? Is it all incompetence? Now there's a special place for incompetence in Eskom, and there's plenty of it that's been around. But is there a possibility there's also some design? You've always got to ask yourself, who might gain out of this situation? Who might gain? I'm going to remind you of a little story called Enron. You may remember the name, how California was defrauded out of billions during an energy crisis. Now, important thing to remind you about Enron was that the Bush family was in power, and they were great friends with Mr. Lay and the Enron boys. They were such great friends that they didn't listen to bleating Californians about their rate and cost of electricity. In fact, California had a limit of $250 per megawatt, I think it was. Let's see, I think some of that information is in this very article. And what Enron was doing is it was buying 250 a megawatt hour from California, and then they created this free market, and they were reselling it to states in the Northern Pacific for 1,200. And the more they were having power that was being generated, they were a trader, Enron. They didn't even own that electricity. They were just intermediating. They kept taking that power from California and selling it into other areas and providing a surplus at a fatter profit, till they created shortages in California, and California had grid down. That was a completely fixed market. They were fixing the market. They had scams. You can see the nicknames. They had little nicknames for little plays that they had, where they were shifting power to different areas and buying and creating shortages so that they could sell for more in those areas. They were almost like the railway station guy that can flick the railway lines and send trains in different areas, and creating a jam over there and a jam over there and a free-flowing line over there, and thereby creating false imbalances in supply and demand so that they could profit out of it. It was an utter scam. The company eventually failed, thankfully, for their scamminess. The Bush family were very, very close and implicated, and shareholders, and said what a stand-up guy Mr. Ken Lay is, right up to the bitter end until Enron went down. The directors were known for telling all their staff to buy their shares. It's never been cheaper. As a technical analyst and a trader, high volume, major spill. Goldman Sachs, yes, your investment bankers and control structures were giving it buy recommendations up to within 3 weeks of it going bust. A massive control fraud. Anybody who listened to the analysts and did that, and the poor staff that were egged on to put their pensions, I hear you not, that they could control into buying Enron stock, were cleared out, while these guys had off-balance sheet cookery. Now, it's not quite as simple as an Enron story, South Africa situation, but some of the principles are similar. Some of the principles are very, very similar. In other words, there's control structure behavior in there. Let's just talk about coal, because essentially, coal is power. And it's dirty power, by the way. It's real dirty power, but it's power. And that's what these stations are earning. So where does South Africa come in the top 10? You know, you've got grid down. You must be a minor player, or you must have to import coal. Let's just have a little look. So Ukraine has 65 million tons. Number 9, Colombia, 85 million tons. Kazakhstan, massive place for minerals, etc., 116.6 million tons. Whoops, what's this? Coming in at the 7th biggest, and not slightly. The previous one is 116. 260 million tons of coal, and they don't have power. 260 million tons pulled out of the ground, and they have to load shed that businesses can't make calls, can't switch on lights, can't operate anything electronic, printers, anything. And water might stop running. In certain areas it has already. How does this happen? How does this happen? And in fact, the irony of all ironies is they are exporting coal. South Africa is exporting 77 million tons of coal at the same time, and this article's been shared and it's become a bit of a Facebook meme, and this article is now an attempted debunk of the Facebook meme, although it doesn't answer some key questions. How do you get to be an exporter of coal? And China and India are some of the recipients of it. And China is the biggest miner of coal, but of course they've got a huge population, so they also want a little bit more. Well, this article goes on to say, well, the coal that South Africa is exporting is the top grade coal. It's the best. And the Eskom power plants were designed to make to run on the low-grade coal, which is plenty of it and is not commercially viable for export. So this, from the old apartheid era, contracts and style, was a way of earning foreign exchange, and rands could be exchanged for dollar-based, usually the yuan, etc., etc., but mostly I suspect dollars to pay expensive debt on borrowed infrastructure projects. So they will sell the best coal on the claim that the best coal couldn't be used in the Eskom. Now, I'm not a PowerPoint specialist, but I would have thought enriched coal shouldn't do any damage. But maybe, let's say, if it's too good a coal, it's not good for it. If it's designed for low grade, I would have thought it's more dangerous the other way around. But hey, let's say we accept that aspect. So South Africa is exporting coal, 77 million tons. Mines 260 million tons, but it can't run its grid. How does that happen? And most of the generators are coal-based. Well, it comes back to maintenance and scams. Let's have a little look further into this. South Africa hasn't always been a major coal exporter. This is where they talk about the quality. Our export is highest grade coal. Eskom boiler plants, they were designed for a majority of coal that's right next to the power station, so they wouldn't wanted it close by, so there's less transport, and sub-economic coal, which was kind of not such good quality coal. Well, I was hoping it would continue on. Where's that article there? The ads for everywhere, including a nude restaurant. How about that? A pop-up nude restaurant, anybody? What do you say? What do you say? Get it all out. Bring a piece of coal with you. I'll tell you what, you'll be able to buy something. Anyway, so the other aspect about this was the contracts that they did. So they did certain contracts that were absolutely dire. One of them was with a BEE company that signed a deal to procure coal. So it was basically an intermediary. It was Tegeta, managed to secure a lucrative supply contract with Eskom after it acquired Optimum Mine and the Cornestone operation. Now, this unfortunately was part and tied up with the great Gupta family, which was a scam and basically theft. It was infamous through the Gupta family, through their Oak Bay investments, described as the skeleton key to the state coffers. They used this. Big contracts were paid to them as a major business. Duduzane Zuma was on the board, the son of the president. Scam, 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 defraud. In other words, the coal and the utility gold mine, the family silver jewel that was Eskom, is being used as an enrichment tool for both the control structure and the government of the day, so that they could steal. And this is exactly what's happened. And the whole Gupta saga played out. They're now on the run, but immense money was lost. Great contracts. They turned their back on other suppliers, making the relationships go sour so that they could jump on the scam deal with Tegeta for the handbacks, only for it to fall apart. And now they have to return and cap in hand and renegotiate, and they got hammered for it from legit suppliers. So this has been a very, very costly and expensive exercise, and this is the key thing. Yes, there's incompetence. Yes, there's lack of maintenance, but they don't care as long as they can steal. This is the key element. As long as we can steal and enrich, we won't worry too much. Tomorrow's another day. We'll kick the can until the day of reckoning for that can comes. So let's talk about another aspect about it. This 260 million tons of coal, where is it coming from? It's coming from BHP Billiton, Anglo-American, Xstrata, Exxaro, and Sasol. Now, Sasol was South Africa's oil mining company. We don't have oil, but we squeezed oil from coal. And it's one of the places they got oil and petrol from. BHP, Sasol, Anglo-American. Anglo-American, for those of you that are not South African, is the Oppenheimer. It's the birth star of the Cecil John Rhodes, Oppenheimer, Rothschild ownership of minerals in South Africa. The Cullinan diamond sits in the Queen's crown for a reason. And that was from Barney Bonato and Cecil John Rhodes. The mines, the diamonds, the coal, the gold, all of these things have been seized and are owned. One of the key things most people need to know that in 1994, Mandela was for nationalization of the mines. In other words, making them assets of the government to manage for the people. In other words, they had a communist agenda and were tied to the South African Communist Party under a zealot Joe Slovo, very much like a modern day Bolshevik of our time. And they were then visited. Mandela had a little visit to London where he had his head turned by a certain party. And I'm going to be doing a separate video on this element and other things, and a prediction and a scenario cast for where South Africa is going, separate to this. This is an energy and control forward discussion. It was one of the few things Mandela conceded on. He returned from that trip in England and no longer pursued his nationalization agenda and persuaded the entire ANC party to move with him. What subsequently happened is financial companies, energy, gold and diamond companies and banks were allowed to escape South Africa. That meant they maintained their listing on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, but went over to the UK and listed in London and other places. So Anglo-American is listed in the JSE, Johannesburg Stock Exchange, and the London Stock Exchange. Companies like Sanlam, Old Mutual escaped. Investec, I will be talking about them in a very interesting analogy. So banks, SAB, breweries, later to become the New World Beer Order with Anheuser-Busch. Watch that video. I've got a planet. It's a big one. And it's the model of how the world is going. One world order, company by industry, owning the bulk of everything. But I'll come back to that later for what your control structure is planning on you. So these companies escaped and they maintain a listing to not look like they're completely bolted, but the main listing is now offshore and away. So all the CEOs, the directors, the board, all living in London, all living the life of Wani. They escape. They are not facing the power down right now. Let's put it that way. Anyway, so these are the classic old companies. Now what's actually happening is, my assessment is, there's an engineered short supply here also. Part through incompetence, part through intent. Because if you knew and could see it, and believe you me, they were being warned in '98, they were being warned many, many times. But those warnings just seem to fall on deaf ears. Now, yes, incompetence, but there's a value here for Anglo-American. What, of course, is happening, their coal needs to be bought, and it's their crap coal. Remember, the good stuff's going to China, getting premium contracts, going to India as well, on premium contracts at premium pricing, the high grade. The low grade coal, they're going to start getting at much better rates. And what is happening to the South African consumer? Well, you saw that 350%. Let's pop over, in fact, and have a look now at Anglo-American and see how she has done. So this is in the London Stock Exchange, and I'm going to get my little wee pen out for you. So we had a kind of stock market wet the bed, basically, particularly with the Federal Reserve doing the exchange, doing the rates, saying, whoops, we aren't going to up rates anymore, that all the risk is to the downside. So overall, round about October and down, this was quite a rocky period here, this area. So since the beginning of the year, I'm going to clear that out, since the beginning of the year, if we take roughly the low here at 1,530, I think that's pence, so it'll be £15.30, that's there, how's Anglo done in this new world coal order and this manufactured short situation? And it's also not just the shortage of coal and the shortage of diesel, it's also the maintenance on the equipment that is creating further shorts. It is creating an environment that prepares the South Africans to pay much, much more for electricity. It is switching them off so they realize what a massive disruption to its day, so they in the end accept the ram water. They're like goose being foie gras fed and stuffed with the feed like this, only instead of it being food, it's increases in their energy. And they're going to go from being a cheap provider from the old days to being one of the most expensive providers. And who's going to gain? Well, you're going to see Anglo's London listing share go from £15.30 and tap out recently. Remember that this is only the first quarter of the year, somewhere between 20.5 and 20.75, 20.5 and 20.75 from 15.30. So you're talking about a 33.33% gain, quite handy over there. And remember something, this is the UK listing, and that is in pounds. So why don't I just pop over and do the same? By the way, there was a recovery in the stock market generally as well, but this is far higher. The stock market since the beginning of the year has not done 33.33%. That's the UK listing. Let's see how the JSE listing is done. This is your chart for Anglo-American PLC. So here we are down at 269 Rand 24. 269 Rand. Whoops, let's get the pen drawer. So during this period, it certainly served some people. You've got to ask yourself, who were those people? I've already discussed who the shareholders are. It aren't only them, but it certainly is the shareholding class in the energy sphere. And you've gone from a low, round about just before the beginning of the year, of 270 Rand to 380. So always follow the money. Who serves? Who is served by this? Anglo-American. You don't get a more clear control structure company in South Africa. I grew up knowing it. It was the biggest blue chip of everything, and they were in everything. Diamonds, eventually got Hardorf, De Beers, gold, etc., etc., etc. So 270 to 380, you've picked up 110 Rand over 270. You've picked up 110 Rand over 270. It's going to be a very close to 270. That's how much you've gained. If it was 135, it would be 50%. It's not much short, somewhere between 35 and 50%. I'd say you're looking at about 40% there. I could do the maths if I really asked, but it is high. So 40% plus in Rand terms over this period. So clearly it's been great for Anglo. There's your coal maker. It's been great. What else has been going on? Well, let's talk about the greens. On the Rockefellers and the you know, I talk about energy. It's the Rockefeller tax. It always is. It's what's coal in South Africa was oil in America when the Rockefellers monopolized that, and then they've crashed it so that they could get everyone else thrown out the market, bought it all up for pounds in the pence, and they're going to do the same here. Now, is South Africa green? Well, sure as hell not. If you're using diesel and coal, you are stinky ass black. You are smoking the place up. Does it meet any of the green requirements? Absolutely no. And is there any serious intent to meet them? No, just word speak, word salad, nice intentions, no numbers. Commercials do not need to even mention how much carbon they're generating. So no reporting. So on the green side, we're absolutely backward here. And it doesn't seem to be a concern for the very people that push these agendas in other parts of the world. Okay, so what else can I tell you about the coal? Well, interestingly, when I was last in South Africa, I watched Carte Blanche. and there was a story about coal theft. And I found that really, really interesting, and it's just come back to me. Now, unfortunately, I can't watch this. It's only available in SA, and I used a VPN and all the tricks in the book, but they were too smart for me. But I watched the whole program, and I'll tell you exactly what happened. Guys were leaving the coal to deliver it to the provider, the supplier who was supposed to get it. The drivers were being met. They were swapping trucks, or the load was being unloaded onto another truck. Someone else was buying for 1 cent per ton truckloads. So he literally, if you got 100 tons, he would pay R1. By the way, that's 1/14 of a dollar. It was a complete scam. It was a complete scam. It was on carte blanche. It was patent theft, but the person was technically paying, and they took the truck empty. Every third truck would be taken empty. So when the guys thought they bought 5,000 tons of coal, their warehouse would have 3,500 tons of coal, and there would be 1,500 tons already missing. So they're immediately short of coal before they even started. And the game was with the driver and the person who came and got in the truck with him and took the vehicle to the depot. They put these theft depots close to where the plants required them. So they were literally unloading the coal next door. Now, it's a very easy thing to stop this. It's an utter scam. It's a typical out of control, lack of pride, lack of morality state of affairs, and it's a tragedy. And we can laugh about it, but it's a tragedy. And what actually happens is those people are out of hand. They can't trace who it is. They can't claim on insurance. Their prices, they have to push prices up because they've got a massive theft loss, and it was ongoing. And we saw Derek Watts, and there was a presenter, McFarlane Molelele, asking all the questions, all the right questions. Carte blanche, for those that are not South African, is kind of like an investigative attempt at truth journalism and at all, and holding people to account. And it was quite clear that this was an endemic disease. Now, you could stamp that out. And if you were Anglo, you should be made to ensure that your goods got to the power plant. But there was no consequences for Anglo. In fact, I think this theft is kind of encouraged. It's kind of like the kidnappers or the people smugglers that took Syrians, Libyans into Sweden and Germany. They're part of the deal. You've got to have the gangsters. What does this do? It further exacerbates the shortage, further pushes prices. Prices are at the margin. So if you're short and there's limited supply, you actually have to bid a lot higher just to get that extra bit to make up what you're short for. So these thefts further add to the shortfall and further push prices that have to be paid. So the beneficiaries are the crooked government that does crooked contracts, the petty thieves and their set-up buyers who buy it for a pittance and have the plot next door to where it's supposed to be delivered, and the control structure companies that actually benefit from shortages, and also the disciplining of the citizens in being forced to try operate without one of the most core fundamental utilities they absolutely require. Setting them up and priming them to pay, in essence, a higher tax than they need to. The right to have electricity, you will be forced to pay more. It's a way of extracting tax. Also, I see it as business unfriendly and as potentially racist. Who are the biggest consumers? Businesses, and probably the more affluent parts of the community. So it is a white tax. This is not to say it doesn't affect and hurt black people. It absolutely does. But it is disproportionate on the tax base. It is disproportionate on the tax base. However, when you talk as a percentage of disposable income, it's going to be brutal to the working class, blue collar black. But a lot of stealing is going on, a lot of copper wires, a lot of skullduggery are being shifted and being tapered off. Municipalities aren't being charged and are being backed up. So this is an epic endemic, and it is classic of fraud. And who pays? The law-abiding middle income Joe Schmo. And I was looking to try get some of the video of that coal theft, and I couldn't get it because of the block on the SA program. But I did find thieves trying to steal from a moving truck, and on this ironic note, I thought I'd leave you with this truck doing literally S-ing across both lanes while cars can't get past it, for two guys hanging on the back of the truck. This gives you an idea of the essence of the culture, the climate, where everything is a thief game. From the government, from the control structure that benefits from the shortages and the disarray and the lack of benefit. Here you have two car drivers waving and going mad while this guy is doing S's on the back of his lorry to try shake off people that jumped on the back of his lorry to thief. And I can't say this is there's a positive outlook for South Africa. Will the load shedding eventually end? I think it will. But what will the prices be? What will the blood, the pound of flesh that will be extracted by the time the average South African gets regular, reliable electricity? What will they spend on diesel, on backup kit that they won't ever have? And why couldn't they go self-reliant and get their own grid set up so that they could never be? Because a monopoly, Rockefeller said it, competition is sin. These people run on monopolies. They run on owning you and holding you. You may not escape. You are destined. Tertiary extraction to the nth degree, rental extraction to the nth degree. Energy is a basic right. It should be competitive. They should break it up. They should keep the competent bits. They should allow competition, and they should be on clean energy, not coal, as soon as they can. None of these things are being initiated, and it is by design, not only incompetence. On that, I love you and I leave you. If you want to learn more about trading, understanding markets and the control structures, pop over to our webinar on themarketsniper.com, and here's to wishing you a good night and hoping for the best. Watch out for my other South African content about the New Zealand events and the supposed rise, the greatest threat in the world, the white extremist, the right-winging white extremist. Oh my God, are you going to learn something there? All the best for you, and talk to you later.